Welcome to a new unit in this Excel course. This time I'm going to talk about cell formats and how we can design custom formats. Well, cell formats is relatively straightforward. You just input something into your cells. Imagine I'm just going here. A very easy example. Make 900.03. Then I make 0.2. Here I directly see he replaces a 0 in front of my decimal point. So he actually adds something, adds an additional type of format on numbers because it's preset that decimal numbers in Excel should always lead with a number. If there is no number given, he will automatically set a 0. That's something we're going to learn about in a moment, how we can actually force him to do something like this. So if there's nothing there, replace it with a 0. Then we can, for example, add negative numbers, or we could have, for example, some kind of text. That's actually the 3 parts I want to consider, or maybe let's make it 4. I could have a 0, basically with nothing there. Okay, so how can I transform something like this? As I said, well, just select this, can go right click and format cells. Might have the possibility to go with the menu, but this is a bit faster. And well, if I open this, I already have here the different formats available, directly available to me. I have number formats, currency formats, date and time formats, whereas in some cases I can directly combine them. In date I also have down here, like for example, date and time. And I can use time values only. And I can use different other stuff like pure text. And that's my main focus in this session, I can use custom formats. And custom formats, they always have the same structure because as we see here, I use a lot of signs. Going back into this in a moment. But the important part, I can have up to 4 different parts in a custom format. And all parts are separated by a semicolon. Well, what are the 4 parts? Well, the first part concerns itself with positive numbers. The second part with negative numbers. The third part with zeros. And the fourth and final part with text. Well, let's start with a simple example. Here we see we already have the first example where we can see how he displays this. And we can learn about the first 3 of these signs. That's the hashtag, the question mark, and the 0. If put hashtag, this means, as we can see here, he takes whatever he has before the decimal point or decimal delimiter. So if I want to assure that I can also tell him what to do with the stuff after the decimal point, I actually have to enter the decimal point here. And while in this example it's straightforward, I have a decimal point here, I have a decimal point here. Even in Excel versions where you have a different decimal separator, so you use comma or whatever, still have to use here the point as decimal separator. Well, now the interesting part is with all the stuff that comes after the decimal point. So here I could go, for example, enter 1 or 2 additional hashtags. Then you see he only displays something when I input 2 of them. That's the specialty about the hashtags. He only displays something when he has all the information. So here I entered 2 values after the decimal point. So if I go with 2 hashtags, he will only display this if he actually has 2 values. Okay. What's the difference to the question mark? If I were to replace this with the question mark, at first glance this would look similarly. This would also look similarly if I were to replace this with 2 zeros. So how can we actually get an idea what's the difference about those 2 or 3 signs is? For this, just go and click OK. And select only the second example, the 0.2. If I take a look at the 0.2, I see here I used before the decimal point the hashtag. So he does not have anything here, so he does not display anything. If I replace this hashtag by a question mark, or more question marks, you see for each question mark I put here, he will add a blank. On the other hand, if I go with a 0, for each 0 I enter, he will display a 0 here. So if nothing is entered, he will just write a 0. If something is entered, then he will display what he was given. So if I have here 900.03 and I go like 0. something something, he will take the 900. If he is not given anything, he will go with 0 point. Okay, what about the parts after the decimal point? Here I have 2 hashtags, so he will only display what he is given. Well, before I had 2 hashtags, he displayed this only when I used 2 hashtags. Why was this? Why does this work here? Why didn't this work before? Well, before I had 0.03. If I only display the first decimal, this is like 900.0, and this is rounded to actually 0, to 900. So here, he will only display again what he is given. If you want to force him to display something, you could either use, again, the question marks. Here, well, we don't see this, but the question marks show that I have the 2 as reported, and I have a blank afterwards. If I want to have what we are actually known, like 0 and then display up to the second decimal, we just go with 2 zeros. So if he has something like the 2 here, he displays the 2. If he does not get anything, because it's only 0.2 and not something afterwards, he will put a 0 there. So that's the case for the second decimal. So in this case, I see if I work with the zeros, he will always display what is there. If there's nothing there, he will display a 0. If I use the hashtags, he will only display what he gets. If he does not get anything, he will not display anything. If the result would be a 0, like as the first value after the decimal point, he will then just leave this. If I use question marks, I will get what is given. If nothing is given, I will get a blank. Well, so much for the first part. Then I could have the second part in this context, which is, well, I still have some space here on the left, or if I consider the text, on the right. So what if I actually want to fill this text? Here we can imagine this text is filled with blanks. Actually it's not, but well, we could imagine this to be the case. But what if I want to fill this, for example, with dots? You might notice from Word, if you build table of contents, before the page numbers, you get like dot, 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 page number. We can do something like this here as well. So for this, we start with an asterisk, and then you put a sign after the asterisk. That is what he has to use to fill this up. So if I want to fill this with points, I just go asterisk point. This means he will fill the space which is available here on the left with dots. Click OK. It looks like this. I can do this in front or after this. And what I can also see, at this point, he will directly go with the points up to the 0. If I want to have some space there, I can just enter the space here. So you see it moves this to the right. So there are some things I can directly insert. into this. So I can directly insert, for example, zeros. I can insert directly plus, minus, dollar signs. Like if you want to have this as dollars, could go with dollar signs, could go with euros. So a lot of different possibilities are available to insert different letters, different symbols. If this for some reason at some point doesn't work, means you might have to put this into quotation marks. Sorry. Okay, so this was the first part. This was for positive numbers. What if I have negative numbers? Well, negative numbers, that's actually, and we'll go with here with 0, 0, 0 as well. Negative numbers, that's actually the second part. So whenever I start semicolon, go to the second part, that's where I'm concerning myself with negative numbers specifically. So if I don't put anything here, no semicolon, he treats the negative numbers like the positive ones. As soon as I put a semicolon, he does something specific for negative numbers. Well, what do I want to have for negative numbers? Well, I could start here with 0.00 as well. Here I see he does not display the negative sign in front. He will just display the numbers. So if I want to have the negative sign, I have to put this here. Then I get the negative sign. Maybe if you go into accounting, stuff like this, you want to display negative numbers in a different color. So for example, in red. And you can do this. You can display different types of numbers in different colors. For this, you just open these brackets and type in the number, the color name, like red. If I click OK, you see here this number is displayed in red. So I could go with blue, black, green, so different other colors. So the second part works more or less the same way as the first part for positive numbers. The only difference, if I'm not actually enforcing this, he won't display the minus. So I actually have to tell him, look, here is a minus. Okay, so this is the second, positive numbers, negative numbers. Then there's the third part. This is for zeros. So what if you enter a 0? Well, first off, we can just display this as 0. Okay, if I click OK, nothing happens. If I insert a 0, well, this does not really surprise that I get 0 as a result. But what I can do here in addition is, like, for example, put like a minus in front and back. Then if I enter the 0, looks like this, but if I enter minus 9, it's this one negative. If I enter 12, I get a 12.00. So I have specific formats for each of the different types of numbers. Well, maybe I want to write something here, like this is 0. If I just go put 0 here, enter 0, I get some strange results. Even if I try to correct this, won't actually go away. So there's a big problem with this. Because in some cases, some of the letters are considered specific signs. So I can try put this into quotation marks, as mentioned before, and actually get here. I input 0, so you see this up here, but he displays this as 0. And that's a critical point. Here as well, I have those dots, I have the euro sign, but it's still a number, so I can still calculate with this. If I have displayed all the stuff like this, I can, for example, calculate the sum of both of them. I can go this plus this. So this works. If I were to write this by hand as -0 minus, and here ... 0.20 euro, I can no longer calculate with this. So that's the important part why I should use these custom formats. But well, this was only the first 3 parts. I'm still left with one additional part. That's the 4th part. That's for text. Here I can use a different sign, the hashtag, the @ sign. If I use the @ sign, that's basically the text which was input. So if I just go here, write down test, well, he displays the test, the value I entered. But if I want to see some changes, I could, for example, here as well, change the color. You see, once you enter text, becomes blue. If I enter the 0, you write 0 again. If I write something negative, this is automatically red. So the same stuff I discussed before with entering additional comments, using specific additional signs in this, or symbols, works as well. Whereas for the numbers, I'm using hashtags, question marks, and zeros. For the text, I'm using the @ sign. And well, that's everything in relation to working with numbers and with text. And then we have an additional part. We can't see this here with the, we can actually see a few examples for this. Here, for working with dates and times. And we see they differ in regard to how many H, M's, S I cite, how many M, T, or J's I cite here. So if I work with date and time formats, I can just recall that, well, if I start with the smallest, with the seconds could either be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then if I have 2, 10, 11, 12. I could also decide to go with something like this here, with S and S, so with double S. The double S means display something like 1 or 2 seconds as 0, 1, 0, 2. Same thing applies for minutes and hours. So if I go with MM, he will display 5 minutes as 0, 5. 7 hours, 0, 7 in this case. If I were to go with this, would be 7, and 12 would still be 12. And well, something similar applies as well for the days and for the month. So for T and M. If I use 1 or 2 signs. Let's make this with an easier example. So I'm just typing down here, let's try 24th, 2020. Okay, this is not date. This is how the date originally looks like. Here I have this format, days with 2 T's, month with 2 T's. Year with 4. If I go only to 1 month, I will only see the 4th, so the April, as 4 and not as 04. So this works the same way. Okay, what is then the difference with years? Well, years I have 2 or 4 J's. If I go with 4, get the whole part. If I go with 2, I get only the shortened, so the last 20. So it's like last few years were 17, 18, 19, 20. So that's the way to go with this. But with day and month, I also can extend this. The days I can extend up to 4 T's. Let's just have a look. If I go with 3 T's, I not get actually the day as such, I get the weekday, the corresponding weekday. So here, the 24th would be Friday. If I go with 40s, I will get Friday as well, but not in the shortened version, but in the longer version. Well, here you see I'm actually working with a German language Excel, which is just transformed into English, or using the English background. That's why it's here T, M, and J. In the English version, I would have D, M, and Y's. And, well, the days would read as Friday and correspondingly FR as well. Okay, this was for days. With month, as I said, 1 and 2 is pretty clear. I have something similar as with the days. If I go with 3 M's, I get the abbreviation of April. 4 month gives me the whole name of the month. 5 gives me a 1-letter abbreviation of the month. It looks a bit strange, but well, that's the way how I can actually work with custom-made dates and times as well. And well, similar things as before apply here as well. So I could add, for example, additional parts here. So I could go with something like this. Then whenever I have a date, he writes like date, then writes it like this. What's actually in the background here is the real date as is. The interesting thing with dates, we're going to go into more detail with this later on, is a date by itself is also just a number. That's what you can see if you format this into typical number format. Then you see here the 24th of April 2020 is actually this number. So it's an integer. Well, it starts by counting from the 1st January or January the 1st of 1900. Then continues counting onwards. Well, every day an increase of 1. Well, hours, minutes, they are just a subpart of a day. So you can use the decimals to actually describe hours, minutes, seconds of a day. So the whole number as a decimal describes a date before the fraction, before the decimal point, and the time after the decimal point. Well, that's all. Well, not necessarily all there is to formats, but this is basically all I want to talk about with regard to formats in this unit. So I hope you learned something from this session, you enjoyed listening to it, and if you want to see more on this topic, feel free to visit the rest of the course or have a look at the corresponding playlist. I say goodbye and see you next time.